What's up, everybody? I'm David Wilson. Thank you so much for having me here today at the London Geeks Meetup. Excited to talk to you today about my Geeks best practices as a Geeks user for over 5 years, or not over 5 years, almost 5 years. I guess I'm sort of overstating my credentials here. I've learned a lot of interesting ways to use it for managing my personal system configurations and development workflow, and just other things here and there in the sort of Linux software sphere of things. So in this talk, I'll share my current set of best practices for using Geeks. And I'll admit up front, this isn't like a super polished talk. This is sort of just like a brain dump of things that I've came to realize either recently or maybe a year or two ago. It just really depends on the feature of Geeks that I'll be talking about. Please feel free to ask questions anytime. I think I should be able to hear whenever the hands up thing clicks. I'll be happy to answer questions. So first of all, don't use specification to package. I don't know if many of you sort of understand what specification to package is. I'm sure that many of you who have written manifest files have seen specification to package, but basically this is a procedure that will look up a package, a Geeks package, based on the string form of its name. I think it's better to use package symbols. I'm sure that a lot of more advanced Geeks developers or Geeks contributors will also say the same thing, because there's a number of ways that can go wrong. One recent example of that is when the NSS certs package got added to the base packages for system configurations. What happened to me is that I had NSS certs in my system configuration, and I had my system configuration using specification to package. Let me actually just pull up my config right now, and then I'll be able to show you what I mean. So base.scm. So in here, I don't think I have that now, which is good. So let me go down. Yeah, so I've changed my config up since then. I used to use specification to packages here. I'll pull up the old version on Codeberg, perhaps. Maybe I can actually do it here. Magit log L. Yes. Okay. So NSS. There we go. So if I pull down this this diff, you can see that I removed this NSS certs. But if you actually go look at the code at this point, whenever I was editing my configuration, you'll see that I was using specification to package. I was mapping over the list of strings for packages here, using specification to package to pull in the set of packages. NSS certs was one of them. Now, what happened was the NSS certs that gets resolved by using specification to package was actually a different version than the one that actually is referred to by the symbol for NSS certs. So if we look up NSS certs, I'm going to use Geeks Emacs for this, or what is it, Emacs Geeks? I can never remember the ordering of the names. NSS certs. There are two different versions, and for whatever reason, one of them had the name NSS certs, and it came up first. But then the one, so 399 is the newer one. And I believe that it was either that one showing up whenever I used the specification package, or it was the older one. Can't remember. But since there's two of them, whenever you search for a package by name, it's going to give you, I don't know if it's like the newest one with the same string name or what, but you don't get a consistent version of a package when you ask for it by name. Now, in many cases, this isn't a problem. But it was a problem whenever this package got changed, or whenever this got added to base packages, because you all of a sudden had a conflict. It appeared to Geeks that you have one version of NSS certs being pulled in your own configuration, and then another version of NSS certs being pulled into the base packages configuration that it gets added to all systems now, or at least the ones that use the base packages variable. So it complained that, oh, you have NSS certs twice. And I'm like, why? Because I see it only once. But then I, eventually got to the bottom of the reason. But I still didn't realize that it was specification to packages that was, part of the reason it was causing the trouble. And I had to take it out entirely. Then I kind of started realizing that there were other problems that I ran into in the past as a result of using specification to packages. If I happen to leave myself some clues here in the org. So another thing that was actually happening to me, and I never really came to a conclusion on it until I actually make this change to stop using specification to package in my system config, which was I have a modular system configuration. So if you go look at my base.scm file and look at the folder that it's in, there's multiple SCM files for the different systems that I use. So the one that we're currently on right now is Phantom, and I load up that base configuration from David Wheel Systems base. I'm doing a little bit of a funky style here right now. Don't pay too much attention to that. But the idea is that each individual system configuration inherits from that base system config. What I found is that whenever I was using specification to package to pull in my packages for my system profile, it made Geeks system return very strange error saying that the base operating system symbol could not be found. Base operating system is in this file, my own base.scm file. For whatever reason, whenever I took out that specification to package functionality to source all those packages, that problem went away. And I think the reason why that went away is because I'm not an expert on this. My guess is that when you use specification to package, it's like scanning over all of the list of possible packages and looking for them by name. And it's having to look at all the load paths that you have set up, all of your channels, and then any additional load path that you've added to Geeks, which I do because my .files repository is treated as a set of Guile modules, basically. I added to the load path. So for whatever reason, that scanning process caused Guile to return errors saying that the symbol wasn't bound. So anyway, specification to package inside of your system configuration or your home configuration, I personally feel is a bad idea because it can lead to strange issues that are hard to diagnose. They may not be fatal issues. They may not stop you from using Geeks. That error that I was seeing for probably a year and a half at least didn't stop me from applying system configurations, but it did, make me wonder why it was complaining about something that wasn't true. Let me see. Is there something happening in the chat here? Oh, are we having tech issues?
I think it's just one person. I think most people can see it, but
okay.
I think one person can't see when the screen share. So carry on. I think you're okay.
All right, cool. Thanks. So yes, the one place where using specification to package does sort of make sense is in manifest files. So let's see if I can pull up .scm manifests. There we go. So I have like an old desktop.scm file here. This is just a manifest file where you would want to use, let's say, Geeks shell or Geeks install to pass a manifest file, which is really just a listing of packages. So you would use specifications to manifest here, which is an extremely common thing to do in Geeks. So using it here is okay because based on some of the other things I'm going to tell you later, normally the situation where you would use this is not in one of the system or home profiles. So you wouldn't run into the same kinds of problems that you might run into when using specification to package in your system profile or home profile. So I think this usage of specifications and manifest, which is effectively using specifications package, is okay, though that's the only place. I think that anywhere else, using it like that anywhere else is painful. Now, the one main reason that people tend to use specification and package is because it could be a pain to import all of the modules for all the packages that you want to use in your configuration. However, if you think about it, okay, on one level, you're writing a configuration for your system, and maybe you don't want to have to be too elaborate with it. But think about it, we're writing scheme code, so maybe it makes sense to actually write the code as if it's scheme code and use modules, or at least this like use package modules syntax that kind of takes a lot of the boilerplate out of it, to pull in the actual symbols for the packages that you use, and then use them directly, like I'm doing here, and not use specification to package. There's benefits to this. One of them being that it's very easy to apply package transforms to individual packages whenever you do it this way. I don't know if you know about, I think it's options to transformation. There's a procedure for that where you can apply very specific package transforms, like updating a commit or the Git URL where the software comes from, or the repo comes from, or anything like that. You can do all kinds of tweaks to packages using options to transformation. And let me see if I can find the use of that. Options to transformation. There we go. So I have one right here where I'm defining a transform for the Emacs Doom themes package. Here's a little side tip. If you're using Emacs Next or Emacs Next PGTK in your profile and you're trying to use Emacs Doom themes, you're probably going to run into a bug that's in version 2.3.0 of Emacs Doom themes. So the way that I fix this issue is use a package transformation to update Emacs Doom themes specifically to a newer commit that has the fix for this issue. Basically what happens is that Emacs starts complaining at you saying that there's some invalid face. And you're like, why? I don't know what I did. I'm not setting any face in my configuration. It turns out Emacs Doom themes is had to be updated later to adapt to some changes in Emacs master. So options transformation here is saying I want to change the commit for the Emacs Doom themes package to this commit hash. Now you can see an example here of kind of the extra hoops you have to jump through to apply this transformation whenever you want to use specification to package. This is like an older commit, and I haven't updated everything here yet, so it's a good example. I'm using specification to package plus output, but I'm also wrapping it in that transform. This is a little bit dirty because I don't want to apply that transform to every single package that comes through here because it only really applies to Emacs Doom themes. So if you're using the actual package symbols, you don't have to do this kind of extra layer of wrapping. Another thing you can do is you can use like const star to, let's see, to pull that out, like const star transform Emacs Doom themes here, and then continue working on your map there. You can do something like that too. But I don't know. I think it's better for multiple reasons just to use the actual package symbols so that you don't run into trouble later down the road. For some things like Emacs packages, it's pretty easy because many of them are just in these two modules. But in a system config, if you've got multiple packages you're trying to pull in, like here, you definitely want to try to use this use package modules. All this does is just insert a bunch of use module expressions for all the modules under GNU packages with this symbol at the end. So GNU packages audio, GNU packages video, GNU packages NFS. It just sort of automates that whole set of imports for you, so you don't have to do like 30 imports up here at the top of your configuration file. So keeps your configuration a bit more clean, and then also allows you to use package symbols instead of loading things by string. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to say on that issue. That's it. So that's it for that one. Anybody have questions related to that? So Polyedre says, specification of package allows to pin the version of a package. What would the alternative if we use a symbol directly? It would be using, well, you could use the package transform. I'm not exactly sure what the syntax for that is, but it is a good question because I do want to point out that there are times where it's useful in specification of package to refer to specific package outputs. And I'm guessing probably you're doing it like this here too, like 2 point whatever something, right? At least for package outputs, the alternative is to use a list and say git and then the output name. So if you're using an actual list of package symbols, this is the special syntax that gives you that output. In fact, I think I use it somewhere else in my configuration. If I were to go look at, what is it, glib? Yeah, right here. So in this case, I'm trying to pull out the bin output of glib when I'm putting it into my desktop profile. And I had to use a special list syntax. I don't know if it works for versions, though. Somebody in the chat might know that better than me. But at least for outputs, this is the way to do it whenever you're using package symbols. Yeah, the transform could do it. However, I'm not sure if that's going to pull the right actual package definition, or if it's going to try to change the version, the sort of the tag of the commit that it's going to try to pull. Like it's going to pull a specific version tag from the repo. So there may be a different way to do this. Hopefully somebody else knows the answer to that question, though. Let me see if there's anything else. Any other questions? Text chat, voice chat?
No, I think you're good.
Rune says you can't really pin the version for sure because when you geeks pull, old versions can vanish. Okay, that does make sense. Yeah, better to. Oh, I guess you would use an inferior or something like that, wouldn't you? Geeks inferior. Because if you probably do need to lock it to a specific commit of the channel. I haven't really used inferiors, but it is possible to do this. You basically have to say that you want to use a specific channel configuration for a package. Yeah, inferiors for channel, it says, right? You define an inferior. Inferiors for channel configuration, and then you say look up inferior package. So that's something that could be done. All right, moving on. The next thing is to use Geeks Home for everyday config. Now, I know a lot of people probably do use Geeks Home, but I know that not everyone uses it. And I guess it makes sense because it's like another thing you have to learn. But the reality is that Geeks Home and Geeks System are not very different. The style of configuration is very similar in that you have a specific profile for your home profile, just like you have a specific profile for the system profile, sort of the system configuration. And then you also have services that get set up in your home profile. Now, service is not like a program running in the background necessarily. A service is basically a unit of configuration that can do multiple things to your home user profile, like installing specific files, installing specific packages, configuring certain programs, lots of stuff. It's super useful. And I think that more people should use it if you're not using it already. What I think is that your home config is your true user profile. You should not use Geeks install. I'll mention more about that later. But your home config should be the place where you put all the stuff that you need for day-to-day use in your desktop environment, not for like programming projects or anything. There's different stuff for that, but just the things that you need to run your normal workflow, your normal desktop environment. Maybe there's other sets of packages and things that you need as well, but there's possibly different ways to do that as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. So your home config really is a place where you would put the things that are like the core to your user specific use cases. For the system, it's all the things that you need to set up for your drivers, any kind of like system-wide software that needs to be installed, which for a single user system is probably not very much. And then any system level services to actually make the system function. Everything else should be in a home config, things that you personally, the user, use. So home does a lot of cool stuff, like you can set up your dot files with the home dot file service type, which is a pretty new thing. I think it got added maybe sometime late last year. It's basically a replacement for GNU Stow. So, excuse me, if you already have a folder of dot files, like maybe you have a dot files repo and you got a lot of files that you symlink into your home directory, you can use this home dot file service type to just take care of that for you. Now, one drawback of that is that it will take all of your dot files that it wants to symlink and put them in the GNU store, so you can no longer edit them directly. So that one kind of benefit of symlinking those files from your dot files repo is that you can kind of edit them and make check-ins. So you'll have like another level of indirection now between making changes to your dot files repository and then like actually applying those changes to your system. But it's not that bad. Then you can run user level services like SyncThing. Maybe if you use SyncThing, it's a really good program for peer-to-peer syncing between your various devices. Like if you want to sync files from your desktop machine to your phone or to your laptop. So you can easily run things like SyncThing. We'll also talk about pipewire, running that as a user level service a little bit later. Generating configuration files with per system settings. So like if you want to set a certain DPI for one machine versus another, or maybe a set of fonts or a set of packages. Maybe you don't want all your packages on one of your machines. You can do that with your home configuration. Also, you can split up your configuration areas into their own home services. So like maybe you do video editing on one machine, but you don't do it on another machine. But you want to have that stuff in your home configuration. So you can just pull in your own custom home service for video editing in your configuration for that one machine and have that be set up there. It just makes everything a bit more tidy and geeks-like for managing your user level configuration. So I definitely think that's a great way to organize your home configuration. Also, it's a really good way to get started with writing services. So Geeks services. At first, I didn't really know much about Geeks services. I had never written a system level service because I really never had a reason to. I was using them, but I didn't really know how they were constructed. I'd read the documentation, but I didn't really experiment, so I didn't really know much. But then when I started using Geeks Home, it was a lot more important to start writing your own home services for two reasons. Number one, I started using it pretty early and there weren't that many home services yet. So you kind of had to write your own if you wanted to use Geeks Home for anything non-trivial. And the other is that there are certain things that you will want to write your own home services for, maybe certain kinds of customizations you want to do, et cetera. So it's there's a kind of a lower barrier to entry because it doesn't feel so system impacting to write a service in your home configuration. And the thing that you will learn about writing a home service is that it's all the same stuff that you would do in a system service. You're either going to try to add packages to your profile, which means like a home service can bring in packages specifically related to whatever that home service does. It can set up shepherd services. It can place configuration files somewhere inside of your in your home folder. It can do lots of things. So a lot of the same stuff that you can do with home services, you can also do with system services. So it's a great playground for you to learn how to write Geek services so that you can go and learn how to write system services as well. Because it's literally the same patterns, especially like with service extensibility and everything else. It's all the same stuff. You can't use them interchangeably. You can't use a home service in the system profile and vice versa, but the same patterns are in use. So you will learn and be able to work in both places pretty effectively. The last thing I want to mention, since this does come up with some folks I've been helping recently, you definitely want to install Emacs and any Emacs packages that you're installing from Geeks packages. So like, Emacs-Doom-themes like we saw before, any Emacs packages that you're installing using Geeks, put them in the same profile. And in this case, that would be the home profile, because this is what I'm recommending to you to do, because otherwise those packages don't get found by Emacs. I think that there is the way that the Emacs load path gets configured, I think is based on which profile Emacs is installed into. So if you install Emacs using Geeks install, and then you install Geeks packages using your home config or vice versa, Emacs can't see them. So just keep that in mind if you're going to use home configuration. You may have to change how you set up Emacs if you convert from system config or a profile or Geeks install to using Geeks Home instead. Just keep that in mind, because I'm sure there's a lot of Emacs users here. Any thoughts or questions on that part? Rustislav, hey Rustislav, says, from my experience, building an inferior version of a package may take too long sometimes. Yeah, because you're basically having to do a full pull of the channel configuration and then build all the packages, and then you get the package out of it. So yeah, anytime you're trying to like pull in a new channel config, like even if you use like Geeks Time Machine, it can take a while. Any other questions, thoughts? I'm probably going to run over time a little bit, so you can always stop me if I'm rambling too much.
You're all good. We're not constrained on time right now.
All right, I'll move on. So next, do not use Geeks install. Use Geeks shell. Geeks install is super convenient. Usually you would use that for the following tasks. Like maybe you're trying out a new app. I used to do this all the time. I'll be looking at the output of Geeks pull -- news -- detail or whatever the parameter is. And I'll see, oh, cool, there's this program that I've heard about, but now it's actually packaged in Geeks. So let me use Geeks install to install this program and try it out. Well, when you do that, you're putting a program and its dependencies into your user level profile. That's your home /.geeks -profile. If you're also using Geeks Home, it can sometimes cause weird conflicts between programs, because you've got two different profiles that may be loaded at the same time with their own dependencies that are not up to date with each other, because maybe you don't run a Geeks upgrade to upgrade your user level Geeks profile that frequently. I sure don't, because I forget that I even have packages installed there. So sometimes you'll get things really skewed out of version sync. And then maybe you have libraries that are getting picked up with newer versions of programs, but they're not really compatible. So you end up with issues there. Or you just have software installed, kind of sitting around your system, and you can't garbage collect them because they are attached to a profile or to a generation of a profile. So you just have a bunch of stuff just sitting around your system, taking up space for no reason. Another thing is that maybe you occasionally use some programs and you install them there, but you don't install them maybe in your home profile or some other approach of using this. So like I'm basically telling you, like if you want to use Inkscape, don't do this. Don't use Geeks install Inkscape and then run Inkscape. Use Geeks shell instead, and I'll tell you why it's better. Use Geeks shell Inkscape -- Inkscape. What this does is it will install Inkscape into a temporary profile for the use of whatever you want to do with it. But if you use this -- parameter after the Geeks shell command, it will basically run the following command directly. So in a console, I don't know if it's going to run quickly here because I don't know how long ago I've run anything. But if I were to do this, Geeks shell Inkscape. This may be a bad example, but because if it takes a while to install, it will suck. There's probably another program I can use for this if this takes too long. But the idea is that you want to install this package only at the time that you really want to use it, especially if it's an application you're just trying out for fun, or maybe you're just evaluating one in case you may want to install it into one of your profiles later. Yeah. 9 geek substitutes are taking a little while. Let me use TileEd because I was using it in a game jam last week, and I think that should still be pretty easy to pull up. There we go. So that just immediately pulled up TileEd. The reason why it was so fast is because I've already installed TileEd into the GNU store by using Geek Shell previously. So it remembers that package is already there. And since I haven't pulled since then, it's already there, already ready to go, and it can relaunch immediately. So if you see that again, I can just run that again and it launches immediately. So why is this better? It's better because you're not attaching it to a root profile or like a garbage collector root profile, like your system config, your home config, or your user level config using Geeks install. So if you were ever to run Geeks GC to clean up the unused items in the store, then it will get rid of Inkscape. Because if you don't really want Inkscape to hang around, it's better if it can just get cleaned up eventually whenever you need to clean up all the stuff that's on your system. Because if you've used Geeks for long enough, maybe 1 year, 2 years, and you haven't reinstalled, your system gets hugely gunked up with all the stuff that gets built as derivations, all the older versions of programs, all your old generations of your home config, system config, etc. So it's good to run Geeks GC occasionally to clean all that up. And using Geek Shell for this specific purpose of running one-off programs helps you to get those things cleaned up as well, so they don't just sit around there, maybe causing problems with your system. The other cool thing is you can use, I think it's a meta ampersand in Emacs do the same thing. So I can use TileEd just like that. So I'm going to run an async shell command and just run TileEd this way. And to me, that's pretty convenient because there's some programs that I don't use super frequently, but I do use them, and I can just launch them from within Emacs just like that without having to really think too much about it or go into a shell or anything of that nature. It will take a little bit of time the first time you try to run it, just because it needs to pull the substitutes and then build the derivation locally and then be able to run the program. But it's a small price to pay for not having a bunch of extra stuff on your system when you don't need to have it there. So not only that, let's see what else. It's also useful to use Geek Shell for common tasks which require a larger number of packages to be installed, so you don't have to add them to your home configuration, system configuration, etc. For example, like music production or video creation, anything where maybe you have a couple of main programs that you use plus a lot of other like auxiliary packages, maybe plugins or other things. Creating LaTeX documents generating files from LaTeX documents is another thing, because maybe you have to have like 15 TeX packages or 30 or 100. I don't know how many you use, but maybe you need all those things to build your documents for your thesis or something. But you don't want to have all those packages installed all the time. Maybe you only want them there some of the time. And the great way to do that is to create a manifest file that contains all the packages you need for that particular purpose, and then use Geek Shell-M to pull in that scheme file that has that specification in manifest form with all the packages, so that they can install them and then drop you into a special shell that has that environment set up to run anything you want. And you can still use the same -- functionality to run a program in that. So let's say, for instance, I have this music production.sem and I want to use Ardor to do some work on some music or a podcast or something. I just have all the packages I need in this music production.sem. Then I just launch Ardor straight through that. And then the whole environment gets set up for that purpose. But then I don't have it installed in my home config or my system config, so I can always garbage collect that if I need to. I can just keep it as kind of a throwaway thing. So I used to use separate Geeks profiles for this purpose. So I would have manifest files, and then I would use Geeks install and install to a specific profile path, so that I would have like maybe 5 different profiles for different purposes and all load them at the same time in my my bash profile. I don't do that anymore. Number one, because Geeks Home doesn't really make that very easy. But then I realized that I shouldn't be doing that. If I want to have those packages in my Geeks Home config, I should make a home service to configure all that, because it also gives me extra benefits like being able to set up configuration files, run services, etc. Or I should just use a manifest file and use Geek Shell directly to pull all those packages in and run the program that I want. The other nice bonus of using Geek Shell for this specific purpose is that whenever you run Geeks pull and you've updated all your channel configurations, the next time you use Geek Shell with this manifest file, it's going to update all those packages to the latest versions. So like you don't forget to update the tools that you use, like if you installed them using Geeks install, because you have to separately upgrade that profile. Now you automatically get the newest versions of things whenever you pull in that that temporary profile with Geek Shell. I think that's everything for that one. Questions? Let's see. Polyedra says, if I were to test the software using Geek Shell and then I need another dependency, is there a better process than exiting the shell and adding the dependency, or does Geeks install inside the shell, only install for the shell? Yeah, Arun and Fabio say the right thing. You can nest shells. This is pretty new. This wasn't the case in the past, but I think in the last, I don't know, was it 6-9 months, they added that. So it is possible now to run nested shells. It can get a little bit confusing though. So I would recommend, if you do need another package, use a manifest file. Adding packages to the Geek Shell command line directly is a liability because you may forget which packages you were using. So if you've got more than 3, I would say make a manifest file because you're going to forget. So just another little best practice I didn't think to put in there. If you got more than 3 packages on the command line, make a manifest file. Then you don't have to worry about that too much. Marcus says, I also like testing stuff with Geek Shell container to avoid gunking up my home directory .files. Yeah, any of the container flags for Geeks Home or Geeks System, super useful for testing out new services that you're writing, especially home services, system services, so that you don't have to worry about messing with your actual system config, but you can test it as if it was a real deployment. Shirley says, are there times when Geeks install is the right thing to do? Personally, I say no. I don't think that you should use it. I think that Geeks install is only for people who are using Geeks as a as a package manager on foreign systems, and they don't understand what Geeks is yet. Geeks install is like the first thing that you try whenever you install Geeks. You're like, okay, let's say Geeks install Emacs. Oh, cool, it works. But then eventually you have to learn the right way to use Geeks, and that's where the massive skill climb has occurred. Like you have to sort of rethink your whole mentality of how to manage software and systems. But that's great though, because when you do that, it's like galaxy brain. Boom! Everything makes more sense now. So anyway, I'm over exaggerating that, but maybe I'm not. Let's see. Geeks install is really for new users. Thank you. So Arun and Fabio say the same thing. Have you been using dir-env or envarc in combination with Geek Shell? Not me. Excuse me. I know that some people do, but I just haven't really worked that into my workflow yet. But it is pretty cool. There's a blog post by Dave Thompson that I linked to that I think does mention that, and it can be quite powerful actually. David says Geek Shell -m rdevel looks like the solution to checking an R package with the latest rdevel before submitting the CRAN. Yeah, Geek Shell has so many uses, man. Like I swear, Geek Shell I'm using every day for something. You don't really think you would use it whenever you hear about Geek Shell, but it really is like one of the most useful things in Geeks, aside from, Geeks Home and Geeks System. Russell Love said, regarding adding packages one by one, has anybody tried Geeks modules? I haven't seen this. What's that? Environment modules. Yeah, I'll have to look into that one further. I have not personally looked at it. Hello, Alvaro. Alvaro says, if you have a really nasty shell incantation, like, oh, yeah, if all the container network, emulate FHS, et cetera, oh, yes, that one's fun. Looks like you had some really interesting work to do. Should you put this in a shell script? Yes, you should definitely put that in a shell script. I don't know if there's a better way to share parameters for Geek Shell invocations, but definitely that looks like a shell script to me. Because there's no way you're going to remember that. Either that, or you're just going to have it in your bash history, and then one day you're going to delete it by accident. You're going to cry, which is what I've done before. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. So,
I have a question.
Yes.
So I use the Emacs X window manager. Is there a way to try out Emacs package with Geek Shell without having to close Emacs and restart Emacs again?
There may be some magic that somebody knows about to do that, but I don't think so because, well, okay. There may be a way. So there's a trick that is in a blog post that Dave mentioned. So let me just pull this up real quick. There's a way to eval a Geek Shell into a running environment. They're right here. So if you use this eval Geek Shell search paths, basically what it does, it extracts the environment variables that would get set up as a result of calling Geek Shell, which really is the magic sauce of Geek Shell, is it just calculates all the environment variables that are needed for the profile and then activates them in a bash shell. So if you basically take this eval expression, you can drag those environment variables out into your existing session without creating a sub shell. And by doing that, you might be able to, but even still, you're editing environment variables of a running session. I mean, it's conceivable that in eShell you could do this, and it might set the environment variables in Emacs, but the other way would be to actually manually add the load path of the profile of the Geeks shell profile to Emacs, so that you get those packages into the Emacs load path. It's kind of nasty, but I think it would work. Maybe Emacs Geeks needs a helper command for that, or there could be one. I don't know. But yeah, there's probably a way to do it. Like, you'd have to do some manual stuff. Maybe somebody else knows a better way.
There are also a couple of blog posts or videos by Andrew Topin, if that's the right pronunciation. So that's also, I think it's the first instance that I've seen that used, and I found it useful.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, it would be nice if there's like a first class way to do Geek shell parameters in a shared way. Almost like if you could have a shell manifest, in a sense, like a scheme object that you set up in a scheme file that describes the shell environment, and then you could just tell Geek shell to run that. I think that would be pretty cool. Okay, so let's see. Yes, so using the similar things that we talked about before with using manifest files, you can go pretty far doing software development with Geek shell, because basically you're setting up a shell environment with all the tools that you need for the task at hand. So if you're writing a C++ program or a Python program, you can use a manifest file to pull in all the dependencies you need and then run them directly. I do think that if you are doing software development, you should not install Python or GCC or anything into your home profile or into your Geeks user profile or even into your system profile, because version differences are going to bite you in the ass. I will tell you that from personal experience. Things are going to be coming from different places in the include paths. Like, you're going to try to include certain files or use certain like C library functions, and you're going to get weird errors. So just don't do it. Don't install GCC tool chain in your user profiles at all. Always use Geek shell at least always use Geek shell for this one way or the other. I'll tell you a different way to use it too. So if you do that, then you make sure that the environment that you use for development of a particular project always has the right versions of dependencies right there. And you can make double sure by using --pure whenever you run Geek shell, because what it does is like clears out all the other environment variables that are already there. It can cause other trouble for you, so you have to kind of like, figure out the right way to use Geek shell pure, but it definitely will help you to not end up with trouble when you're trying to build projects that need to be using a very specific set of the tool chain for the language and the dependencies. So like I mentioned, there's a good article that Dave Thompson wrote, which is also based on an article by Marius, who is definitely one of the longer time Geeks contributors. And there's some good stuff in here. Some of it is about like, I think direnv is mentioned. Yeah, if you put this in your direnv configuration, then you can use direnv. Like, you automatically enter, a folder. Direnv will pick up the Geek shell invocation and automatically set up those environment variables. So it's kind of nice, actually. Excuse me. And it sounds like there's an Emacs direnv extension too, so that might actually make it possible to pull in Emacs packages. That would be pretty cool if Emacs direnv made it possible to pull in Emacs packages from a manifest. So another thing to look at. I would say definitely check out this article by Dave Thompson, Geeks for Development. But I think, though, if you want to get the most out of Geeks for software development, you should consider writing actual package definitions for your projects. And I don't mean like package definitions in the Geeks main repository, which you can do that too, obviously, but specifically for development purposes, writing like a geeks.scm file in your project repository. And there's a number of reasons why this is useful. The first one really is, excuse me, that you get to use the power of Geeks not only to just like install the dependencies for your project, but you can also build it locally for various different systems with cross builds. You can have your unit test be run or your integration test be run. You can set up like the full environment needed for both developing and running the program. So it might seem like extra work and kind of a headache to do it, but there's a lot more resources now to tell you how to do it. For example, this really excellent blog post by Ludovic that happened last year. If you haven't read this blog post yet, from development environments to continuous integration, sorry, starting to lose it already. This article tells you a number of different ways that you can use Geeks for software development, and like it progressively gets more and more awesome as you go through the article. So if you haven't read this before, definitely read it. It's going to blow your mind because it's going to show you how to use Geeks in ways that you probably haven't thought about unless you're already an advanced Geeks hacker. So like turning your project repository into a Geeks channel, or using Keras or Cheris, how do you pronounce that? Using that for your continuous integration for your project. Also, let's see, like I said, cross builds, lots of other really interesting stuff that come out of this. Also, the thing that I didn't know about until today is that there's an updated version of this guide that's now in the Geeks cookbook. So if you go check that out, it's actually a little bit more updated, I think. And there is I think level 1, if you check this out, it will tell you how to make a Geeks package inside of your project repo to use the local source directory. So you're not trying to pull from your Git repository when you already have it here locally. So this is kind of necessary for you to be able to locally build your project using a Geeks package definition. So check that out if you want to learn how to use Geeks more for software development, because it's super useful. I already moved that up to the top. So for example, we can check out the guix.scm file for the Guile Hoot project, which is a super interesting project if you haven't heard about it. Basically a scheme to WebAssembly compiler. This is a Geeks package configuration for not just Hoot itself, but also for the sort of in development version of Guile. Also some of the dependencies they use. I think GN is like a build tool or something for Chromium. Then there's like Chromium packages they're pulling in, and some tweaks they're making to everything, even to Node, I think. And this is the actual Hoot package itself, which is pretty simple, but it's pulling in some of these dependencies, I think, like Guile Next, and V8. So if you want examples, there's a number of different places where you can check out examples for this. I think like the Geeks website has a guix.scm file. There's other people's websites that use these kinds of things for building websites even. So take a look around at various different repositories of Geeks affiliated projects, and you might find these things. You can learn some things from looking at their package definitions for local development. Any thoughts or questions there? Let me find my Chromium. Steve is also posting a link to one of his articles. Definitely check out Steve's articles. I'm sure you all know that already, but Steve writes some really useful things for Geeks internals, which I should probably read some more on, because there's still things I don't know, even though I dig around in the Geeks code pretty often. invRC.el is another thing. Cool. Any thoughts on the dev side of things? I want to try to move along a little bit because we're getting close to the hour. All right. Next. Okay, so this is not so Geek specific, but your Geeks configuration may benefit from it. I won't spend too much time on this, but I want to make a case for people to try using Wayland and Pipewire instead of using Xorg, Pulse Audio, all the sort of old generation desktop environment tool set. So the thing about Wayland is that it does a lot of the work that the Xorg server and clients or whatever, it's kind of distributed across different programs, et cetera, kind of does it all in one place. No longer do you have to use like Xrandr for configuring your screen resolutions and like separate programs for setting up like your Xmod map and like setting up your custom key bindings and stuff. Usually in Wayland window managers, you can set up all that stuff in this configuration of the compositor. Like for instance, I use Sway. You're looking at Sway right now. In my Sway configuration file, I've got like display configurations for multiple machines here because it doesn't really matter. I mean, I'm just mentioning all the device, or sorry, the adapter names with resolutions, blah, blah, blah. My custom key binding configurations where I turn caps lock to control, fonts. Let's see, what else? Yeah, then all the normal stuff. But basically what I'm trying to say is like, it's a lot easier to have one program where you can configure most of your desktop environment. For example, like there's a program Fuzzle, which is an app launcher, and you don't have a configuration file for that. You have like one program with a bunch of parameters you send to it, and you have that in your Sway config just set to a key binding. Same thing for Mako, which is a notification daemon, so that you can see little pop-up notifications from websites and applications, etc. Then other programs, like a screen dimming tool, which I turn off on this machine. You can even use G settings directly, which is kind of a little bit of a hack, but you can do that to set your GTK fonts and themes and stuff. So there's multiple ways to use Wayland as like the one-stop shop for setting up a full desktop environment, a minimal desktop environment, but not so flashy, but still like a working environment where you don't have to install a bunch of different programs and configure a bunch of different things. It would be very easy to create a Sway home service, and I don't know if other people have done it. I know there's probably one in RDE. I would like to make one too at some point, but who knows if I'll have time. But if someone made like a Sway home service that allows you to configure a lot of this stuff, then you could basically have a really high quality Wayland-based desktop environment configured purely from your home config. You could take a bunch of junk out of the system configuration, which is basically what I do. If you look at my base.scm file, I'm customizing it quite a lot. I don't pull in the desktop services anymore. I actually copied a lot of the stuff out of there, the things that I knew that I would actually need, and then I got rid of the rest. So you can have a more minimal system configuration that only pulls in the stuff that you need for running a Wayland-based system, and then just log into Wayland from the TTY. You can just log straight in the console. Sure, you don't have any nice, pretty login screen. Who needs that? You just want to get in the computer and stay logged into Emacs for the next 30 days. So forget about login screens. Just log in at the TTY and then type in Sway at the terminal, and boom, you're in your desktop environment. And you can configure all that with Geeks Home pretty easily. On the audio side of things, pipewire is really, really, really good. Forget about Pulse Audio, forget about Jack, just use pipewire. And these days, just use Geeks Home because there's a home pipewire service type that does everything for you with basically zero configuration. So let me show you, what is it? Common.scm in my config, pipewire. No, not there. Let me just search for home pipewire service type. Right. Okay. So I'm putting in my individual user configs, sorry, machine configs. So this is in my home environment configuration. I'm pulling in home pipewire service type, no configuration. It's coming from GNU Home Services Sound. If you pull that in, then you basically get a working pipewire daemon on the user level, which works just fine. The only thing you might have to add, I'm not 100% sure about this, is the UDEV rules for the pipewire package. If you check this out here, this adds another instance of the UDEV rules service to customize the UDEV rules for the system, adding the things that are needed for, I think, managing the ALSA devices using pipewire. So if you do that, then pipewire has the ability to manage your audio devices when you run pipewire as a user. So it's a user level service that you're running. It does everything that Pulse Audio does, and it does everything that Jack does. If you do audio work in Geeks, like you've used Ardor or other DAWs or any other audio tools, if you run a program called pw-jack, I think I have that listed in the notes here, you basically just run whatever program you want, but you use pw-jack first. This comes from the pipewire package, and it sets up the environment for the program that you're running to treat pipewire as a Jack server, and it works every time, low latency, perfectly. So the reason why I wanted to mention this is because this is one place where having really nice tools that are easy to configure works really well with Geeks, because now you don't have to do a bunch of stuff in your system config. Your system config can be really simple, and then your home config can just be very focused on making the targeted environment you need for working. Then you can use Geeks Shell for all the other stuff that you have to do occasionally or specific projects that you work on. So super high quality, stable environment. Screen management, way better than Xorg. Like, it's worlds better than Xorg. Try it out. If you haven't tried it out yet, it's very easy to try out using Sway or even DWL Guile, which is pretty interesting. If you haven't heard about that, DWL Guile is a project that wraps the DWL window manager, which is based on DWM, but it's a Wayland compositor version. But this enables you to configure and set up your entire environment using Guile. So this is also another really good option. I think Wilco's here in the chat, and I think he's using it right now too. So people are using it, and there's also like home services and stuff for it. Anyway, check it out. It's cool stuff. Let me check the chat. Does Zoom work with Wayland and pipewire? I think it does. Certain things don't. I will say that they're just like using Geeks. There's a bit of a learning curve to starting to use Wayland. Some programs don't work so great. There may be some other environment variables that you need to set. So it can be rough at times, but if you have trouble, there's people that you can ask. You can definitely come to System Crafter's IRC or forum and ask us there if you have trouble specifically with, setting things up in Wayland. Because I have a bit of experience now, like fighting through things like all the XDG desktop portal stuff that is kind of a pain to get working. But the magic incantation, at least in my case, is in my sway config right at the very bottom, dbus update activation environment. You just got to make sure that all these environment variables get sucked into your user level dbus service so that it knows how to talk to Wayland, and a lot of that stuff works. So things like that. It's just things like that that you need to know about. All right, let me get back to the chat. Marcus also mentions Mahogany, which is a common Lisp-based window manager. Yep. All right. So let me move on. What's it? The last thing here. Yes, learn Guile. This is my last best practice, I would say. So when I started learning Geeks, I had very little experience with Scheme, even though I had used like Common Lisp and Clojure for years before that. And it took some time to learn what I need to know about Guile specifically to use and contribute to Geeks effectively. In fact, after I started using Geeks, I kind of went on this odyssey where I was looking at a bunch of different Scheme implementations, which I'm sure many of you also have done. I used Gambit Scheme for a while and learned a lot about writing idiomatic Scheme code through that. And then eventually got back to Guile and tried to learn it better. But if you learn Guile properly, it's gonna enable you to read and write Geeks package definitions, service types, and more, because it's all just Scheme code. I mean, that's the important thing about Geeks, is that it's all code. And the more that you understand how to write Scheme, the more that you'll understand how to do advanced things with Geeks. Because, okay, at the surface, all the record types and configuration stuff looks really nice and kind of user-friendly, but you can do a lot of nitty-gritty stuff whenever you get down into the actual lower-level APIs of Geeks, especially when you start writing service definitions, package definitions that do more advanced stuff, that kind of thing. So these days, I personally learn more about Geeks from skipping around the Geeks code base than I do from reading the manual. I don't really read the manual that often, maybe if I'm looking for configuration details, but I'm usually like rip-grepping all the way through the Geeks code base whenever I'm trying to find things, and you'll probably see me doing that on streams every now and then. So little plug, if you want a good foundation for Guile, including Scheme fundamentals, functional programming patterns, and practical use of Guile as a scripting and tool development language, check out the next iteration of my hands-on Guile Scheme for Beginners course starting on June 8th, which is it's like a week from now, right? 2 weeks from now? Anyway, it's basically a course where I have a bunch of pre-recorded videos and written material and exercises that will teach you how to write Guile and Scheme basically from the ground up. And you will write actual programs that will do system management tools like cleaning up folders and creating files from templates and just stuff that you might do in system crafting. So I think it's been pretty useful for the people who've taken it so far. Some people who have taken it or are currently taking it are actually here right now, I think in the call, which is cool. So if you're interested in learning Guile, definitely come check that out. You can just go to systemcrafters.net and you'll see the link to it on the main page. Hopefully it's not in bad taste to plug that right now, but since it's relevant to the course, because you need to learn Guile to learn Geeks, I felt maybe, it might be okay. Yeah, Arun and Fabio say the source code is the documentation. It is the best place to look. If you want to learn really how Geeks works, eventually you have to start looking at the code and you have to know Scheme for that. But you will learn so much more when you start doing that, and you will feel like you actually can use Geeks for what it's worth rather than just for, a cool distro to brag about to your friends. Yep.
So David, just a couple of general questions. So what, you've got quite a complex system configuration now. What do you think the hardest part has been of creating your configuration? So what's the bit that sort of took the most to get your head round? Are there any tips there for people who are sort of starting the journey?
I think it's there's a real gap between starting to learn Geeks, like looking at the operating system definitions that are in the manual and maybe the cookbook, and maybe use like scan over some other people's configurations. There's a big gap between looking at that stuff and then actually knowing how to use Geeks, you might say idiomatically, like using Geeks the right way. And I kind of want to try to like make a pass at this on some YouTube videos coming up soon. Like how, I know that you've done a lot of work on that too, Steve. Like a lot of your articles are trying to like give these sort of fundamentals and help people to understand how to use it. But kind of these workflows, you kind of stumble on them eventually. Like if you don't have a good learning resource, you kind of stumble on them as you go, and it takes a long time. Like becoming a Geeks expert is not something that happens in a month. Like it really takes years. I don't think it needs to. I think that Geeks is not that complicated that it needs to take years, but it's just a completely different model. And you have to kind of be open to the fact that you're like a baby. You start off using Geeks, you're a baby, wah, wah. Like you're going to have to be crying and throwing a fit for a while until you learn how to set up your system correctly. And then once you do, you're going to realize, oh, okay, I can't actually use anything else anymore because the stuff I'm getting from Geeks is so good that if I try another Linux distribution or an operating system or whatever, I feel handicapped. Like recently I tried installing Void Linux and I felt handicapped, and I went back to Geeks like after 1 week, 2 weeks, just because you can't do all the same stuff. So anyway, I don't want to say more on that. You asked what was the hardest part. I think it's just that. It's like that initial kind of the chasm you have to cross from just starting and getting a system working to actually feeling like you're proficient using Geeks the way it's meant to be used. So it's just up to the people like us in the community, I think, to like try and explain the stuff better so that people get a mental model faster.
I definitely found that there was either the things I could do out of the manual, or then everything was broken, and I wasn't quite sure where to go from there. Which kind of
that is a problem too.
Which is really interesting. Okay, and so what's your favorite kind of either concept or command or capability that we have in Geeks now? Like,
recently I'm starting to appreciate package transforms a lot, and that I've had a visceral reality of that when I was trying to use Void Linux, because I installed Void and I wanted to use telega.el in Emacs, but the version of tdlib in Void was too old, and they were not willing to accept a patch to update it because they're kind of reluctant. They're like a more conservative rolling release distro, which makes sense. They don't want to update a package that might break things. But it wasn't so easy for me to fix that myself. You have to clone down their whole package repo, make a change locally to the package version, build the package in your local repo, which requires you installing tools in the repo. And then once you've built the package in your repo, you have to manually install it into your system. So there's like multiple steps involved. In Geeks, you just go into your configuration, you put the package symbol in your configuration, use a package transform around it to change the version to whatever you want, and then Geeks builds it for you, and you're done. You don't have to think about it again, and it's always there. And if you want to reinstall your system, you get the same version again. So it's the little things like that you don't really appreciate until you try to do the same thing somewhere else, and you realize, oh, other distros don't do this. Other systems, other software doesn't do this. The other thing is something that I didn't really learn until I started working on home services, is that you don't have to like install a package or create a package definition to create a file to put it somewhere on your system. You can just use a G expression directly inside of your service definitions and create whole configuration files, wrap programs with other environment information. You could do a ton of stuff. And one kind of concept I have in my mind right now is, what if you made an application written in Guile, but you don't actually make it so that anyone can install it on any distro. You actually make it so where it's just blended with Geeks. So the way that you install it is that you import the service module from the repo of the project, and then that sets up everything for you. So the way that you configure the program is not through configuration files, it's through Geeks service configurations. Basically, it gives you the ability to lock everything in at the Geeks level and not have to think about like yet another indirection of configuration to like, step down to, or have to like make Geeks work with. Just make everything work together. So, there's one way to look at Geeks where it's a Linux distribution where you can configure things in a declarative way, but then you think about it in terms of, this is a very sophisticated platform for creating purpose-built systems with everything wired in without having to do extra work. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around what that implies, what it really means, but I want to do some research on that soon and like try to come up with a way to explain it.
It's like the difference between Docker as a distribution platform and Docker as a configuration language. You can use Geek to configure a thing, and then you could ship it. I think Arun and Fabio are kind of asking in the chat, are asking this question, just sort of where you're kind of going. Do you see a space for some pre-packaged initial thing similar to what Doom is for Emacs?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've started working on one, and I start too many projects, and I just never managed to get back to all of them. There is Crafted Geeks, which is not the greatest name, but it indicates something. The idea there is that it would be nice if there was an easier way for new people to get started with Geeks that did not require them to understand how to put together a full operating system configuration, home configuration. If there was like building blocks, like say you want a full Sway desktop, maybe you only want to write a small configuration that just mentions the things that you need, and then everything else is taken for you based on best practices of setting up a Geek system. So if I were to pull up this example, I think this example is not very clear because we've kind of messed with it some. And Codeberg is always being slow, so it's not coming up. I wonder if I actually have Crafted. Nope, I don't have it on this machine. Anyway, the idea is that there's ways to create configuration layers above the default Geeks configuration to make it much more user-friendly. RDE is one example of this, and it's great. But I sort of have my own thoughts, and I personally haven't used RDE very much because I don't want to get too stuck on the way that RDE does things. I want to think of another possible way just to make it more user-friendly Geeks customized distribution, let's say. So I think there is definitely a way to do that. It's just like I need help probably because I get excited about too many projects and I can't get all of them done.
Another question then, just to, I think there's a couple of questions in the chat, but another question, I guess those were things that Geeks does well. Is there anything that other distributions are doing or other technologies that you've been looking at recently that you think, is really interesting stuff that should come into the Geeks world,
I don't think so. I mean, probably the person who's asking has something in mind, but here's the thing. Geeks, the only real competition to Geeks, well, I guess there's two different ways that you can compete with Geeks. One is be Nix and be further along, but have a subpar language and questionable community. I don't know. I don't want to start any wars here. Also, there's the containerized Linux distributions like Bluefin. What are they called? Like there's all like the Fedora containerized offshoots. Yeah. That's another way to do it, but it feels a little bit too heavyweight. Like you don't have to containerize literally everything to have a reproducible system. I think it's just like too complex for most people. So the thing that was missing from Geeks to make it compete well with Nix, aside from more software, is an answer to Flakes. And I think we finally have it. It's kind of quietly crept into Geeks. People don't really know about it yet, but I did cover it on a stream maybe a month or two ago, where now it's possible to hard code a channel configuration into your operating system configuration. And it's possible to put your home configuration into your operating system configuration so that you can apply everything with one command, geek system reconfigure, and get back to the exact same configuration from a config.scm file. That is what's been missing that people have been asking about. And the way that Geeks is doing it is completely idiomatic to Geeks. It's not Nix Flakes. It's Geeks using the way that Geeks works to set up a completely end-to-end reproducible system, even at the user level. So it may not cover everything that Flakes covers, but it's certainly much farther along than it was a year ago because people have been asking about Flakes forever for Geeks. So if you haven't seen that yet, it is possible in a Geeks config. Let me see if I can pull up that. I don't know what week that was. Let's see, live streams. It was experimenting with new Geeks features. In this config, we have a home environment configuration. This is a system config file. We have a home environment configuration. We have a channel configuration. Inside of my system config, operating system config, I'll bump that up a little bit. You can see that I have in services, I have my Geeks Home service type, which is part of Geeks. I'm saying that the user named Crafter, which is a user on the system, has this home configuration. That will be applied immediately. Anytime you run Geek System Reconfigure, it will update the home configuration for that user and any other user that's listed there. And it does work the way you expect it to. Now, I'm not sure how it works with generations, because I did look to see if the home configs applied this way show up in Geeks Home list generations, and they don't. So it may be system generations that are controlling this. So that might be a little bit of a catch-22. I don't know. The other thing is, if you modify the Geek service type using modify services, you can specify the channel configuration for the system config. So between those two things, you now have the ability to have one configuration that is locked to a specific pin set of channels, or not pinned. It could just be channels without pinning them. And you also have your home config all in one place. So it's much easier now to set up a new machine from scratch, because you don't have to install the whole machine and then log in as the user and then apply the home configuration as well and get everything set up that way. It's actually easy to just do one command to get everything set up. So I think we're much closer to having super easy reproducible systems for everything, not just for system. So that's pretty exciting to me. Let's see. Arun and Fabio say, I saw your recent newsletter where, among other things, you mentioned OCI container service type, which is recently being added to Geeks. Yes, it has. It is very, very useful. I use it for Jellyfin. Let's see, acid burn. Wait, no. Dot files, acid burn. On one of my machines, I installed Jellyfin this way. So there's OCI container service type where you can actually run Docker containers as Shepherd services. And you can, excuse me, you can forward ports. You don't really need to do it with a host network config, which is something I learned on the stream last week. But anything that you would want to do setting up a normal container to run on a system, you can do it here. There's still some sort of weirdness to work out if you want to use Geeks to be something like a Docker Compose replacement, where you have multiple containers, you want to connect them together. There's no way to declaratively set up Docker networking devices in Geeks, but I think that's just a matter of somebody adding the code for that. But this is a very interesting way to apply Geeks as well if you want to host software with Geeks that is not packaged or is very difficult to package, like let's say PeerTube or Forgeo. Those softwares all, well, Forgeo doesn't actually do that. Other softwares who have a heavy reliance on the JavaScript ecosystem and NPM packages and all that stuff, excuse me, they're very hard to package in Geeks because of reasons. So running a Docker container is often an easier way to host that software in Geeks, and then this service type actually makes it possible to do that. So keep an eye on that, because that's also another really important area that is developing in Geeks land. All right, I think I might be out of time now. I have to go feed a baby. So maybe one last question. Marcus says, can OCI container service type run with rootless Podman? I don't think so, because it's a system service and it's hard coded to Docker right now, from what I can tell from the code. So I think it should be possible to make it work as a user level Geek service with rootless Podman, because Podman has the same command line arguments and the same functionality effectively. So there's no reason why it shouldn't work, but somebody just has to go and make it easy to set up rootless Podman for a user. I've tried to do it a couple times and it didn't work for me because of C groups reasons. And I never came to a conclusion on that, but I'm sure somebody else out there has figured it out. So that needs to be fixed. And then user level OCI container service type with rootless Podman would work, I think.
All right. Well, thanks, David. Thanks for the tips. That was really super interesting. And could really see your experiences having developed over the years. So really appreciated that. And
My pleasure.
There's lots of great tricks on your System Crafters stream. And of course, if you want to learn Guile, then we'll put the links into the video as well. But everything is on your System Crafters site, right?
That's right. And
Brilliant.
someone asked about the notes from this, I believe. So I can pass it to you if you want to include those too.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be fantastic.